These 10 steps I have found are what determine whether or not you get a lowball offer or a policy limit award. Now, what I found is there's 4 types of injury awards. 4. That's the fourth category here. 4 types of injury awards. Number 1, no offer. The insurance, you attorneys know, the insurance company would just as soon pay you nothing, right? You know that. Number 1 is no offer. Number 2 is the infamous lowball offer. You guys like that when you get that one? Okay? By the way, how many times are you getting that? A little too much? A little too much? You're not going to have to deal with it again after tonight. Lowball offer. 3, what I call a highball offer. In other words, you actually get a decent amount of money for the injury award, for the injury. I call that the highball offer. And then number 5 is the policy limit award. The policy limit award. Now, let me go into just a second what distinguishes one versus the other. Let's be very clear. What determines whether the offer is going to be a no-ball offer, low-ball offer, high-ball offer, or policy limit award? These 3 categories right here. These 10 numbers are divided into 3 categories. The first category was the top 5 financial drivers. The more of the financial drivers that are documented, the more the needle of the injury award moves away from no offer, low ball offer into a high ball offer, policy limit award. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Okay. Now the second one is the defense of the case. So the second big category are the 4 categories to defend it. So the more documentation you have to negate their attack, it also will help support your injury award. And then the last one is the 12 steps to tell the story. The more that you have your documentation in this category, that it's delivered in this category. Now, when I say delivered in that category, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the single most important document you're going to get in personal injury, and what is it? The narrative report. The narrative report from your doctors. The single most important document. Why? 97% of the injury award is based on the doctor's documentation. What documentation is the most important? The narrative report. That's if it's done well. Now we do our narrative report in this 12-step formula. When it's done well like that, then it significantly helps tell your documentation story. Now, when you have this documentation, there's 4 types of injury awards. There's 4 potential injury awards from the doctor's notes. Now you as an attorney, you can get more money for other factors, right? Now I'm referring to the money you get from the documentation from the doctor. There's 4. Number 1 is medicals. Number 2 is impairment. Number 3 is pain and suffering. Number 4 is prognosis. Now I will share with you, typically you will not get a policy limit award. You will not get a policy limit award for any one of these individually. But when you start maximizing out each of those 4, that's what leads to a policy limit award. Okay? Let's go ahead and get, so that's the big picture we're going to follow. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk through one at a time right here, one at a time, and then we're going to compare each one to the real world. What's happening in the real world? I'm just going to call that good news, bad news. We're going to go through one at a time and go, what's happening in the real world, and then how does it apply to what type of offer we get, and therefore how will it apply to how many of the 4 injury awards will we get. Sound okay? That's the path we're going to walk right down that path right now. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started. Now, before I actually go into the content, I want you to turn a couple pages back. And what the sheet here says at the very top, it says Financial Claims Worksheet. I just want you to let you know about this sheet. Just turn a couple pages back from where we were. It says Financial Claims Worksheet, okay? And I just want you to know about this. Here's what the Financial Claims Worksheet does. I've included it there for you to take a look at. But what it does is it explains and justifies how to convert injuries into money. Is that important for attorneys? Okay? That's the medical legal part. It's how to convert injuries into money. Now, the example case that I give you right there, the sample case I give you, that's the sample case that I used to take a no offer soft tissue spinal injury award to $110,000. That's the sample case right there. Okay? It goes through each of these right here. It goes through each of these 4 injury awards. And it explains what is necessary for you to maximize your medicals. Then it explains what is necessary for you to maximize the impairment. Then it explains what you need to maximize pain and suffering and the prognosis. That's what it does. Okay? Now, the main point, now I'm going to leave that up to you to look at it later. The main thing that I wanted to point out right now is there's 4 injury awards. That's the main thing that I just wanted to point out, not one. Not one. So here we go. Turn to the next, go back 3 pages from there, maybe 4, and it'll say worksheet, potential injury award. That's where we're going to start. We're going to start on the worksheet, potential injury award. Now before we get started on this, let me ask you a question. It says at the top here, it says, list the number of soft tissue spinal injury clients excluding the disc injury, nerve injury, mild concussion or fracture cases. How many clients on average would you get a month? So what would you say? Mr. Attorney, what would you say? Average? 2 or 3, okay.
0.
Here? Here? Here?
4.
Huh?
4.
4? Okay? Here's the point. Here's my point of what I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you how the average attorney who sees only 2 soft tissue injury cases a month easily loses over $200,000 a year. I'm going to show you that in great detail. There'll be no question about it. Meaning, also, if you don't do that, you'll increase your income over $200,000 a year just by not doing the things that's causing you to lose $200,000 a year. Here's also what I'm going to share with you. You know, a lot of attorneys don't think much about the soft tissue spinal injury because they don't know how to pull it together and they don't have doctors that know how to pull it together. So I deal with a lot of attorneys that they focus on the disc injury. They go, well, just give me a positive MRI. A lot of attorneys, because they go, oh, I got a positive MRI, I know I'm going to get something. That kind of attitude. And here's what else I want to share with you. As we go through this, you're also going to see that this documentation, this is the core documentation of personal injury. In other words, it's the baseline of everything. It doesn't matter if you have an amputation or whatever. This is the like Formula 101 of personal injury. And what you're going to see is if you have a disc injury, you're going to see that most of the attorneys are leaving half the money on the table. I'm going to show you how to double your disc injury award. Double it. That's what we're going to do as we walk through this. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to go through step by step. Here are the top 10 categories. So here we are. The top 10 categories are comprised of 3 units. What's the first unit? Top 5 financial drivers. What's so special about that one? It builds the money. The second unit, it defends the money. The third unit tells the story to help also claim the injury award. So those are the 3 units of the 10, okay? So let's go into each of these units. Now remember, each one of these, the documentation you have for each one of these, all of these are either financial drivers or defend your money, one or the other in some way. So these are the categories that's going to determine whether you're headed to no offer with your injury award, a low ball offer with your injury award, a high ball offer, or a policy limit award. These 10 categories right here, that's it. And they will also determine which of the 4 injury awards you'll be able to apply for. Will you be able to maximize out all 4 injury awards? Will you have some weak ones? Or will you only be able to go after 1 or 2 injury awards? That's what these 10 categories are going to tell you. And we're going to start walking through it right now. So let's go ahead and start with the injury award, okay? Now so we're going to start with the top 5 financial drivers. So we're looking at building your injury award right now with the doctor's documentation. That's what we're talking about, Okay? We're in the injury category. Now also, just so you know, if you're not aware of it, from top to bottom, that's the importance of the injury award. In other words, where is most weight given for an injury award? Top to bottom. The top 5 financial drivers are in order. In other words, you're going to get the most money from the category of the injury. That's the most money. You're going to get the second most money from the impairment category. You're going to get the third most money from the loss of enjoyment of lifetime activities category. Duties under duress is the fourth most valuable category. And the fifth one is the prognosis and need for future care. So let's go ahead and walk through these one at a time and see how it relates to your LOBO offer, how to stop the LOBO offer, and then how to fill that documentation to start creating policy limit awards. So let's go into the injury award category right now. What's the number one? So we have a room full of personal injury attorneys. What's the number one? What's the number one? Now remember, we're only going to focus on the soft tissue spinal injury. Let's leave the disc alone. Let's leave the nerve injury alone, the mild concussion or fracture. Okay? Because everything I'm talking about builds. Everything I'm talking about builds. But it doesn't build if you don't have your base. So let's go ahead and start with the base. Okay? What's the number one personal injury, attorneys?
Cervical sprain.
Yeah, and that's why you're stuck with LOBO offers. He said cervical sprain strain. And that's why you're getting LOBO offers right there. I'm going to give you a clue right now. If that's the majority of the diagnoses you're getting, and it's your primary diagnosis, and that's what you're getting from your doctors, you have a doctor who does not know how to document personal injury. And you're going to see that that's one of the main causes of a LOBO offer. I'm going to show it to you right now. That is not the number, and by the way, it's not the number one injury. It's not the number one injury. What's the number one injury? The number one soft tissue personal injury. Anybody? Attorneys? Attorneys, please. What's the number one personal injury? Anybody?
Whiplash.
Whiplash? I get that a lot. No. It's definitely an injury, but it's not the number one. What's the number one? Here's the number one by volume. Okay? Let me give you the research first. When you look at all the injuries, and this is from the Insurance Research Council statistics. That's where these statistics are coming from that I'm getting ready to share with you. Insurance Research Council. Okay? 87% of all injuries are soft tissue injuries. 87%. Only 32% are disc injury. In other words, only 1/3 of auto injuries are disc. 16% have a nerve component. Only 16% have a nerve component. Only 10% have a mild concussion, and 2% fractures. Now, it can vary. If you're in an urban area, those will be a little different versus a rural area. If you're in the Northeast versus the Southwest, Midwest, okay? So they'll vary, but I'm talking as a generic statistic, okay? That's the statistic. Now, what are the takeaways? What's the importance of knowing those statistics? Well, I'll share it with you. Guess what's happening to the attorneys? Guess what's happening to the marketability and the financial possibilities of the attorneys who only focus on the disc injury? What did they just do? What did they just do?
Actually lost out on some clients.
What percentage? 2/3. 2/3. What did we say? 87% of the injuries are soft tissue, not disc. 32% are disc. Only 1/3 are disc, means 2/3 are not. How big of a market did they just eliminate? A large market, a large segment of the market. And oh, by the way, remember I also showed you how the average attorney walks away from 50% of the injury award? You'll easily be able to double it when you understand these categories. We'll show it to you. We're going to walk through and show it to you step by step. So those are the statistics. So what is the number one injury award? Now remember, we're in the category of what is most valuable, right? We're talking about what's most valuable for financial compensation in an injury claim. That's what we're talking about. So what's the number one injury? The number one injury is called altered intersegmental spinal mobility. Altered intersegmental spinal mobility. And here's what it is. It's a biomechanical lesion. It's not a fracture. It's not a visceral problem. It's not an organic problem. It's a biomechanical pathology of the spine. Altered intersegmental spinal mobility. I'm going to show it to you here in just a second. So what is it? Well, before I go into going into what is it, basically what it is when you have trauma, you have in your soft tissue lesions. In other words, you have micro tears. And things happen, negative things happen with those micro tears in the way of pain and movement, mobility, and how it affects a human being. Those are micro lesions. And what happens is those micro lesions, especially when they heal wrong, permanently wrong, they alter how the bones of the spine move. In other words, when we're born, our bones should move a certain way. When they don't move a certain way, it causes a lot of problems. Okay? That's called altered intersegmental spinal mobility. Now, what percentage of patients typically has that condition after an auto injury when they don't have a disc injury or anything else? Dr. Tom, what have you?
If they came into my office, 100%.
100%? Some form of altered intersegmental, yeah. When I practiced, I found it was 80 to 90%. 8 to 9 out of 10 patients who came into the office after an auto injury had that injury. Oh, by the way, it's 100% objective. It's documented on an x-ray. And it's 100% objective. So that's the number one by volume. Okay? And I'll go into detail what that is and show it to you in just a second. So what's the number two injury? The number two injury is called alteration of motion segment integrity. Again, it's a spinal biomechanical problem. When you have lesions, soft tissue lesions, tears in the soft tissue, heal wrong, it alters how the spinal bones move. That's a pathology. Okay? Causes problems, causes a lot of problems. Matter of fact, it causes the number one disability in the United States. The number one soft tissue injury causes the number one disability in the United States, which is arthritis. I'm going to show that to you. It's a big problem in volume and how it affects people. Unfortunately, it's not being documented very much. Why is it not being documented very much, attorneys? So we have attorneys here. Raise your hand if you've ever had come across your desk the diagnosis of a soft tissue injury, altered intersegmental spinal motion. That was with my client, right? Was that with my client? Probably, yeah. Has anything come across your desk, LMSI, alteration of motion segment integrity? Has anybody seen that diagnosis come across your desk? What percentage of the time does that injury happen in a soft tissue spinal injury? It's about 25% of the time. It's about 25%. So here's what it says. Out of 10 soft tissue cases coming across your desk, guess how many of them should have the diagnosis, generally speaking, of altered intersegmental spinal mobility or LMSI, alteration of motion segment? 8 out of 10. Should have one or the other, okay? So, why is it not being documented? Look how many attorneys have never seen it or never heard of it before. And we have attorneys in here who have been practicing probably 10, 20 years, right? How long have you been in practice? 20. Have you ever heard it? Alteration of motion segment?
No doctors give it to me.
Personal injury, 20 years, he's never had a doctor give it. You go, why? If it's the number one and number two injury, why? Here's why. Here's the answer. Attorneys, you guys practice personal injury, right? How much of personal injury did you learn in law school or you had to learn outside of law school on a percentage basis?
100% outside.
100%.
Yeah, I just got out of law school a year ago.
Right? They don't teach it, right? How much would you guys say?
Yeah, I had to relearn now all the insurance.
Would you say, did you learn much about personal injury, how to put together a personal injury case in law school?
No, that's not what law school.
That's the exact reason you're not getting it from the doctors. It's not taught in chiropractic college or in med school. You have to take outside courses of spinal biomechanics to learn how to diagnose that injury. But guess what is taught in chiropractic school or med school? cervical sprain strain. And it's a very weak diagnosis. And guess what happens? If you have a cervical sprain strain, guess what the likelihood you at least have altered intersegmental spinal mobility? 80%. Now, why is that so important? Well, we'll go into it a little bit more, but I'll give you a clue. Alteration of motion segment integrity gives a 25% impairment rating. How important is that for you, the attorney, in your injury award? How important is the impairment rating in an injury award attorney? Pretty important, right? Okay. LMSI gives a 25% impairment rating, and I'll go into detail in just a second. Altered intersegmental spinal motion give a 12 to 15%. Guess what impairment rating a cervical sprain strain gives? 0. 0. That's the start of your low ball offer. You'll see in just a second. So let's go into the detail of this thing called altered intersegmental spinal mobility, or alteration of motion segment. It's a biomechanical anomaly. What are we talking about? What's it look like? Let's go and take a look at it. Now, in the back of your book, you have all of these images. Just turn to the back there and you'll see this image in the back of your book. And what you're looking at is this is soft tissue. The picture on the left, this is an electron microscope of soft tissue. Okay? The picture on the left is normal. The picture on the right, you can see it has the lesions. That's what micro lesions look like in soft tissue, especially ligaments. That's what it looks like. Now, when it heals like that, it causes a lot of problems. And what I tell you, what's the number one problem it causes? Arthritis, which is the number one disability in the United States. 1 in 4 people have osteoarthritis or arthritis. It gets to be a big, big problem. Okay? Where does it all start? It all starts with that soft tissue injury. That's where the number one disability in the United States starts, from that soft tissue injury. You see the vertebra on the top two, there's 2 bones and a disc there. The reason I've kept that there is around all your bones and cartilage, you have ligaments, tendons, muscle, fascia, surrounding all of it. When you have these micro traumas, all of that tissue is susceptible to these micro tears. And when those micro tears heal abnormally, it causes a lot of problems. Eventually, it causes the number one disability in the United States. So that's what it looks like. So what is it? What is it? Well, here's what it is. This is the definition, and then I'll show you the diagnostic tool. This is the definition of altered intersegmental spinal mobility, or alteration of motion. In other words, it's a biomechanical lesion pathology. How one bone moves on relationship to the other one. Okay? So here it is. This is also in your book. And this is right out of Dr. Panjabi. Anybody hear of Dr. Panjabi? Any lawyers hear of Dr. Panjabi? Okay? Dr. Panjabi and Dr. White are the authors of the Bible of spinal biomechanics. It's called Clinical Biomechanics of the Spine. Doctors Panjabi and White. That's the reference. We're getting it right from the founders, essentially. Okay? Now, here's what they say. What is altered intersegmental spinal motion, or ALMSI? Well, here's the deal. Let's simplify this first, and let's look at a picture. You have 2 bones in the spinal column. Okay, let's look at 2 bones. We're going to measure 2 measurements, 2 angles. We're going to measure translation, how one bone slides on the one below it. Now, guess how much sliding should happen when you're normal? Not much. Okay? We're also going to check angulation. When you bend your head backwards or forward, flexion and extension. Well, those bones should move a certain degree, and they darn well should not move a certain degree. Are you with me? Okay, that's called normal. All right, so Dr. Panjabi and White, Clinical Biomechanics of the Spine, and Spine Magazine research article found, well, when we measure this, in other words, we can measure translation. Now, how do we measure it? We'll take an X-ray of the spine. We'll draw lines on the vertebra. down the back of the vertebra. And we'll look to see how much that line is breaking, how much it's slipping. Now, if the translation is from 0 to 1, you're normal. No problem. Once it goes past, and remember this is translation. One bone, second bone, going like this. Okay? So I'm measuring this. That's what I'm measuring. I drew a line down the back and I'm measuring how far it's slipping. 0 to 1 is normal. That's considered fine. It's within normal limits. 1 millimeter to 3.5, in other words, if it goes 1 millimeter to 3.5, you have a pathology. It's called altered intersegmental spinal mobility. If it goes 3.5 millimeters or greater, you now have the worst. In other words, it's like an upgraded injury. It's now LMSI, or alteration of motion segment integrity. So the first one from 1 to 3.5 millimeters is altered intersegmental spinal mobility. Who said that? Did I say that? No, Dr. Panjabi said that. The author of Clinical Biomechanics of the Spine said that. If you go past 3.5 millimeters, now you're at LMSI. Okay? Everybody with me on that? And we found it by totally objective evidence, an X-ray. Is an X-ray 100% objective? Yes. Okay? Is it medically accepted? Yes. Okay? Is it typically done by chiropractors? Are the diagnostics typically done and measured by the average chiropractor or the average medical doctor? No. Why? It's not taught in chiropractic school. It's not taught in medical school, just like you had to learn personal injury outside of law school. That's why. So, what now? Here comes the next big question. Well, what percentage of the time does that happen? Well, before we go to that, let's go to the second one. Remember I said we're going to look at two measurements? This was one, translation, and I said we're going to look at the other one, tilting, either bending or forward or backwards, okay? Now we said if you go from 0 to 7 degrees, now remember we're talking about one bone on another. We're not talking about full neck range of motion. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how one bone moves in relationship to the one it's connected to. Spinal biomechanics. So if you have 0 to 7 degrees, that's normal. If it goes further than 7, if you go from 7 to 11, that's a pathology. It shouldn't move that much. What had to happen for it to move that way? Remember those fibers I just showed you earlier? Those micro lesions? That's what happened. That's what happened for it to move like that. Making sense? Okay? Objective, quantified, justified. So we got translate, so we're in angulation. So 0 to 7, 7 to 11 is altered intersegmental spinal mobility. Greater than 11 degrees is the stepped up version, AOMSI, or alteration of motion segment integrity. That's how it's done. Now, let me show you a picture of it. This is how it's measured. This is a sample report. This is what a measurement report looks like. So in one report, it'll show each vertebra, C2, C3, C3, C4, C4, C5. And in the first section, it'll say normal, 0 to 7, 0 to 1 translation. The next column, it'll say, you know, was there a measurement between 1 and 3.5? And then the next column will say, was it 3.5 or greater? So it's either normal, altered intersegmental spinal mobility, or LMSI. Are you with me? Make sense? Okay. This is what a report looks like. This is how it's measured. And this report's in the back of your book. You can see it clearer in the back of your book, okay? But if you flip it, go to the back of your book, you'll see that X-ray. You'll see the lines that are drawn on the spine, whether it's a line straight down or lines coming across. And those lines are just measured. And we're just looking for translation that goes 1 millimeter or greater than 3.5, or angulation that's greater than 7 degrees or 11 degrees. If it's greater than 1 degrees translation, the diagnosis is altered intersegmental spinal mobility. That's a pathology. That'll give an impairment up to 15% or more. Typically 15 to 20%, 15 to 18%, something like that. If it's AOMSI, in other words, if it's 3.5 millimeters or greater, it's AOMSI. Now it gives a 25% impairment. Okay? That's what the disease process looks like. That's how it's diagnosed. It's 100% objective. It's measured. It's quantified. And it's totally research-based. It's totally medically accepted. Okay? Now, here's the big question. If you're an attorney, what percentage of time does that happen? What percentage of these soft tissue injuries does this happen? What did we just say? He just said what? He just found 100% of his cases to some degree. I told you in my experience it was 80 to 90%. In other words, the vast majority of these soft tissue injuries have micro lesions that heal abnormally, that alter how the spine moves. The vast majority, not the minority. And that's the #1 cause of the #1 disability in the United States. Are we talking about a little injury here? Are we talking about a low volume injury here? No, we're talking about a high volume injury, high prevalence, and it causes big problems down the road. That's what we're talking about. But we're also talking about it not being diagnosed by the average medical doctor or chiropractor, because it's a biomechanical, it's not a visceral lesion, it's not an organic lesion, it's not a fracture. Okay, when they go to the emergency room, you think they're looking for altered biomechanics? No, they're looking for fractures, dislocations. What percent of soft tissue injuries of auto injuries are just fractures and dislocations? 2%, not high probability. Okay. All right. So if this is